The crowd was on their feet. Under the blazing Friday night lights of Riverside High's championship game, 18-year-old Ethan Cole was everything a parent could dream of. 6'2", lean muscle rippling under his jersey, he moved across the field like poetry in motion. "Cole's got the ball!" the announcer's voice crackled through the speakers. "He's breaking away from the pack!" In the stands, Margaret and Owen Cole beamed with pride. Their son wasn't just a star quarterback. He was valedictorian, student council president, and had a full scholarship waiting at Harvard. The golden boy who could do no wrong. Ethan felt the familiar rush as he sprinted toward the end zone. This was his element. This was where he belonged. The roar of the crowd, the weight of expectations, he carried it all like a crown. Then he saw the linebacker coming from his blind side. The hit came like a freight train. 250 pounds of raw force slammed into Ethan's right knee. The sound that followed wasn't the cheers of victory. It was something far more sinister. A pop. A crack. The sound of dreams breaking. Ethan hit the ground hard. His knee bent at an impossible angle. The stadium fell silent, except for his screams echoing across the field. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" he gasped, clutching his leg as pain shot through his body like lightning. The team doctor rushed onto the field, his face grave as he examined the injury. "We need to get him to the hospital. Now." As the paramedics loaded Ethan onto a stretcher, he caught his parents' eyes in the stands. His mother was crying. His father's face was white as paper. The Harvard scout who had come to watch shook his head and walked away. In that moment, lying on his back, staring up at the stadium lights, Ethan Cole didn't know that his real fall was just beginning. The surgery was a success, the doctor said. 3 pins, 2 screws, and a rebuilt ACL. Ethan would walk again. He might even run. But Harvard? That dream was buried under 16 weeks of recovery time. "These will help with the pain," Dr. Morrison said, handing Margaret a bottle of OxyContin. 2 every 4 hours as needed. At first, the pills were salvation. They didn't just numb the throbbing in his knee. They wrapped Ethan in a warm cocoon where nothing could hurt him. Not the shattered scholarship. Not his parents' disappointed silences. Not the empty space where his future used to be. "I need more," Ethan told his mother 3 weeks later, shaking the empty bottle. "The prescription ran out, honey. Dr. Morrison said the worst of the pain should be over by now." But it wasn't over. The physical pain was manageable, but there was something else, a hollow aching in his chest that the pills had been filling. Without them, the world felt sharp and cruel and impossibly bright. That's when Jake Mendoza found him in the school parking lot, leaning against his car, sweating and shaking. "You look like hell, Cole," Jake said, lighting a cigarette. Jake had been kicked off the team junior year for dealing. Everyone knew to stay away from him. "I'm fine," Ethan lied. Jake studied him with knowing eyes. "How many pills you been taking?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." Jake pulled a small baggie from his pocket. Inside was a brown powder that looked like dirt. "This will take care of what you're feeling, and it's a lot cheaper than pills." Ethan stared at the bag. He knew what it was. He'd seen the presentations in health class, the after-school specials. But standing there, feeling like his skin was crawling with invisible insects, all of that seemed very far away. I don't do drugs." "You've been doing drugs for a month, genius. This is just more honest." The first hit was everything Jake promised and more. The needle slid under his skin like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly the world made sense again. The warmth spread through his veins like liquid gold, erasing every ache, every disappointment, every fear. For 20 minutes, Ethan Cole felt like God. When he came down, he was already planning when he could feel that way again. Three months later, Ethan had become a stranger in his own home. The boy who once brought home straight A's now struggled to stay awake in class. The son who had been his father's pride now flinched when anyone touched him. "Your grades came in the mail today," Owen Cole said, sliding the report card across the dinner table like evidence in a trial. Ethan barely glanced at it. C's and D's where A's used to live. "I'll bring them up." "Will you?" His father's voice was ice. "Because your chemistry teacher called. She said you fell asleep during a lab. You could have hurt someone." "I'm fine, Dad." "You're not fine." The words exploded from Owen like a dam bursting. "Look at yourself. When's the last time you showered? When's the last time you ate a full meal?" Margaret placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Owen, please. He's still recovering." "From what?" "His knee healed months ago. This is something else." Ethan pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I don't have to listen to this. Sit down." Owen's voice carried the authority that had made him a successful lawyer, but Ethan was already walking away. "I said sit down. You can't make me do anything anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Owen stood slowly, his face cycling through emotions, hurt, anger, disbelief. "I found this in your backpack." Owen pulled out a small plastic baggie and a used needle, holding them like they were radioactive. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how my son, my Harvard-bound honor roll son, is shooting heroin in our house?" The word heroin fell between them like a guillotine blade. Margaret started crying. Quiet sobs had seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "You don't understand," Ethan said, backing toward the stairs. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Owen's voice was steady now, but there was something final in it. "You're using drugs in my house, around your mother, and you're lying to us every day. I won't have it." "So what are you going to do? Ground me?" Owen walked to the front closet and pulled out Ethan's jacket and backpack, throwing them at his feet. "I'm telling you to leave tonight. Don't come back until you're ready to get clean and tell us the truth." "Owen, no!" Margaret stood between them. "He's our son." "This isn't our son," Owen said, never taking his eyes off Ethan. "Our son died somewhere between those pills and this needle." Ethan stared at his father, looking for any crack in his resolve. Finding none, he picked up his jacket and backpack. "Fine, I never wanted to be here anyway." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle, and looked back one last time. His mother was sobbing against his father's chest. His father was staring at him with eyes that used to hold nothing but love. The last thing Ethan heard before the door closed was the sound of his mother screaming his name. The concrete was colder than Ethan had imagined. Even with his jacket pulled tight around him, the November wind cut through the overpass like a blade. Above him, cars rumbled past every few seconds, their headlights painting brief shadows on the walls. He wasn't alone. In the darkness, shapes moved and whispered. A woman coughed somewhere to his left. A man argued with someone who wasn't there. The smell of unwashed bodies and something burning filled his nostrils. First night? Ethan turned to find an older black man sitting against a concrete pillar, his gray beard neatly trimmed despite his obvious homelessness. His eyes were kind but weathered, like stones polished by years of rough water. How'd you know? You still got hope in your eyes. Give it a week. The man extended a calloused hand. Ray Washington. Welcome to the Paradise Hotel. Ethan. He shook Ray's hand, surprised by its warmth and strength. What brought you to our 5-star establishment, Ethan? Heroin. Ray nodded like this was the most normal thing in the world. Ah, room 237. That's a popular one. Been there myself. A woman emerged from the shadows, her face gaunt, but her smile genuine. Ray, you keeping our new guest entertained? Just the welcome wagon, Linda. Ethan, meet Linda Miles. She runs housekeeping around here. Linda laughed, like broken glass trying to make music. Housekeeping, that's good. I like that. She turned to Ethan. You eat today? Ethan realized he hadn't. Not really. Not in 2 days. Linda disappeared and returned with a can of soup and a plastic spoon. It's cold, but it's food. Heat's a luxury we gave up a while ago. As Ethan ate, more faces emerged from the darkness. Tommy, a kid who couldn't be more than 19. Mies, who was 7 months pregnant and sleeping in a cardboard lean-to. Frank, who'd lost his construction job when the economy tanked and never found his way back. This is nice and all, Ethan said, gesturing around the concrete cave. But what's the plan? You can't all just live under here forever. The faces around the small fire went quiet. Ray chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Plan? Son, the plan is to make it through tonight. Then maybe tomorrow night. That's about as far as most plans go around here. But there's gotta be something. Shelters, programs, something. You been to a shelter lately? More dangerous than the streets half the time. At least out here, we know who we're dealing with. Ray stood up, brushing off his pants. Some of us got different plans, though. Some of us believe there's more than just making it through the night. Like what? Ray smiled, and for a moment, his weathered face looked almost young. Like Sunday morning, when I baptize folks in whatever puddle the good Lord provides. Like prayer circles on Wednesday nights. Like believing that even under a bridge, God's got his eye on you. Ethan stared at him. You're a preacher? Was. Depends how you look at it. Lost my church when I lost my mind coming back from Vietnam, but I never lost my calling. Just moved the sanctuary from inside 4 walls to under this bridge. And people actually get baptized in puddles? Water's water, son. Jesus got baptized in a river. These folks getting baptized in street water. God doesn't seem to mind the venue. A siren wailed in the distance. Traffic rumbled overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was crying. But around that small fire, under that cold bridge, something Ethan couldn't name was taking root. For the first time in months, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. Two weeks under the bridge taught Ethan more about survival than 18 years in suburban comfort ever had. He learned which dumpsters had the best food, which cops would hassle you, and which ones would look the other way, and how to make a cardboard box feel almost like home. But it was Ray's suggestion that changed everything. You got education, Ray said one morning, noticing Ethan reading a discarded newspaper. Most folks here, their stories never get told right. Media comes down here sometimes, takes pictures of the mess, talks about the problem, But nobody ever just listens to the people. Ray pulled an old digital recorder from his backpack, its case cracked but still functional. Found this in a dumpster behind the radio station. Still works. You want to do something useful while you're figuring out your next move? Get their stories. Real stories. Ethan turned the recorder over in his hands. Why would they talk to me? Because you're one of us now, and because everybody's got a story they need to tell. Linda was first. She sat across from him in the pale morning light, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee someone had given her. People think we just woke up one day and decided to be homeless, she said into the recorder, like it was a career choice or something. Her story unfolded like a roadmap of small disasters, a husband who started drinking after losing his job, bruises that turned into broken ribs, a restraining order that meant choosing between safety and a roof over her head. I had a house once, little yellow place with a garden, grew tomatoes you wouldn't believe. But you can't grow tomatoes when someone's using your head for batting practice. Tommy was next. 19 years old with old eyes and needle tracks on his arms. Foster care, he said simply when Ethan asked how he got here. 13 different homes between age 6 and 18. Some were okay, some... He trailed off. When you age out at 18, they give you a garbage bag with your stuff and point to the door. Happy birthday, kid. Good luck. Mrs. Story was still being written. 7 months pregnant, sleeping in a cardboard shelter, waiting for a bed in a program that might never have space. I want my baby to know I tried, she said, one hand on her swollen belly. I want her to know that even when Mama was at the bottom, she was fighting to climb back up. Frank had lost everything in the economic crash of 2008. 20 years building houses, then overnight the work disappeared. His marriage followed. Then his apartment, then his hope. I had a tool belt worth $3,000, sold it for $50 in a bag of dope. If that ain't rock bottom, I don't know what is. Each story was different, but they all had common threads. A moment when everything fell apart, a series of choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but led somewhere impossible. And underneath it all, the universal human need to be seen, to be heard, to matter to someone. After a week of interviews, Ethan had hours of raw humanity on that cracked recorder. Stories of pain and loss, but also of resilience and unexpected kindness. Stories that made him realize that the distance between his old life and this bridge wasn't as far as he'd thought. These are incredible, he told Ray one evening, playing back Linda's voice talking about her tomato garden. Ray nodded. Every person's got a story worth telling. Question is, what you gonna do with them stories? Ethan looked around the camp, at Linda sharing her dinner with Miss, at Tommy helping Frank set up a tarp against the rain, at faces that society had written off, but who kept finding ways to care for each other. I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something. The screaming started at 3 a.m. Ethan jerked awake from restless sleep to find chaos erupting around the camp. People were shouting, running, crying. In the orange glow of a streetlight, he saw Ray kneeling beside a motionless figure. It was Tommy. Ethan rushed over, his bare feet slapping against cold concrete. Tommy lay on his back, lips blue, eyes rolled back white. A needle lay beside him, along with an empty baggie and a bottle cap still warm to the touch. Call 911, Ray shouted to Linda, who was already dialing on a cracked cell phone. Tommy, stay with me, son. Ray placed his hands on the boy's chest and started compressions. Come on, Tommy, don't you do this. Don't you leave us like this. Ethan had seen overdoses before. Quick nods, people falling asleep standing up, but nothing like this. Tommy's skin was gray, his breathing so shallow it barely registered. This wasn't someone getting high. This was someone dying. What happened? Ethan asked Mies, who was crying against Frank's shoulder. "Bad batch," Frank said grimly. "Word came down tonight that someone's cutting their stuff with fentanyl. Tommy must not have heard." Ray continued compressions, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "Come on, Lord. I know you got better plans for this boy than dying under a bridge at 19. The paramedics arrived 8 minutes later, but it felt like hours. They worked with professional efficiency, injecting Narcan, checking vitals, loading Tommy onto a stretcher. Ray held his hand until they loaded him into the ambulance. "Is he gonna make it?" Ray asked the paramedic. The woman shrugged. "He's alive, that's something. We'll know more at the hospital." The ambulance pulled away, its sirens fading into the city night. The camp stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Death had visited before, but never someone so young, never someone they'd all grown to love. Ray sat heavily on a milk crate, his head in his hands. For the first time since Ethan had met him, the old preacher looked defeated. "Why?" Ethan found himself asking. "Why do you still believe in God when stuff like this happens? When good kids like Tommy almost die shooting poison into their veins under a bridge?" Ray looked up, his eyes rimmed red but still clear. "You want the real answer or the church answer?" "The real answer." Ray stood and walked to the edge of the overpass, looking out at the city lights. "Because I've been where Tommy is. Saigon, 1969. I was 20 years old, and I watched my best friend step on a landmine. Watched him die in a rice paddy 6,000 miles from home while I held his guts in my hands." Ray's voice never wavered, but his hands shook slightly. "Came home to people spitting on my uniform, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, started drinking, then pills, then anything that would make the pictures in my head go away. Lost my wife, lost my church, lost everything that mattered. So how did you..." "I woke up under a bridge in Detroit in 1975, covered in my own vomit, with a needle in my arm and no memory of how I got there. And you know what I heard?" Ethan shook his head. "Singing. There was this old black woman, had to be 80 years old, sitting under that bridge at 6 in the morning, singing Amazing Grace like she was in Carnegie Hall. I asked her why she was singing in a place like that. You know what she told me?" "What?" She said, "Son, this is exactly where that song was written for. Amazing grace for amazing messes. Grace that finds you in the worst places and loves you anyway." Ray turned back to face Ethan, his eyes rimmed red but still clear. "I don't know why bad things happen to good people, but I know that somebody's got to be there when they do. Somebody's got to hold their hand and tell them they're not alone. That's what she did for me. That's what I try to do for folks like Tommy." "And you really believe that? That there's some kind of plan in all this?" Ray smiled sadly. "I believe that love shows up in the strangest places. And if love can show up under a bridge in Detroit at 6 in the morning, then maybe, just maybe, there's something bigger going on than what we can see." The phone rang. Linda answered, listened, then hung up with tears in her eyes. "Tommy's stable. He's gonna make it." The camp erupted in cheers and tears. People hugged each other, cried with relief, offered up prayers to whatever they believed in. But Ethan stood apart, processing what Ray had told him. For the first time in his life, he was starting to understand what faith might actually mean. The withdrawal started 3 days after Tommy's overdose. Ethan had been clean for nearly a month, but seeing Tommy almost die had triggered something. The craving came back like a physical punch, doubling him over with need. His skin crawled, his bones ached. Every nerve in his body screamed for the relief only heroin could provide. He paced the camp like a caged animal, sweating in the cold November air. "I can't do this," he told Ray, who sat, reading a water-stained Bible by firelight. I need to get well, man. I need a hit." Ray looked up calmly. No, you don't. You want one. There's a difference. You don't understand. This isn't want. This is need. I feel like I'm dying. You are dying. Been dying since you took your first hit. Question is, you gonna let it kill you, or you going to kill it first? Ethan kicked at a pile of trash, sending cans rattling into the darkness. Easy for you to say. You're the one feeling like your skin's on fire. Boy, I've been clean for 47 years. You think I don't remember what it feels like? Ray's voice carried the authority of experience. You think I don't remember sweating and shaking and wanting to die rather than feel what I was feeling? Then how? How did you get through it? Ray closed his Bible and stood up. Same way you're going to. 1 minute at a time, with help from something bigger than yourself. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He walked the perimeter of the camp, fighting off waves of nausea and phantom pain. Every car that passed overhead sounded like a freight train. Every light looked like the sun. By dawn, he was on his knees by the side of the highway, dry heaving into the weeds. Ray found him there as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. I'm done, he gasped. I can't fight this anymore. I don't know how. Ray sat down in the dirt beside him. You remember what I told you about that woman under the bridge in Detroit? Ethan nodded weakly. She told me something else that morning. She said grace isn't something you earn or something you understand. It's something you receive. Like rain. You don't make it rain. You just get wet. As if summoned by his words, the sky opened up. November rain fell in cold, hard drops, soaking through their clothes in seconds. But instead of running for shelter, Ray stood up and spread his arms wide. Perfect timing, he said with a grin. Other residents of the camp scattered for cover under tarps and cardboard, but Ray walked to a large puddle forming in a depression in the concrete. The water was muddy, mixed with oil and debris from the street above. It looked like anything but holy water. Ethan, Ray called over the sound of rain on pavement. You said you can't fight this anymore. You're right, you can't. But maybe it's not about fighting. Maybe it's about surrendering. I don't know how to surrender. That's the point. Nobody does. That's why it's called faith. Something in Ray's voice, something in the moment, cracked open a place in Ethan's chest that had been sealed shut for months. The fear, the pain, the desperate clawing need. It all felt suddenly too heavy to carry alone. Will you... Ethan's voice broke. Will you baptize me? Ray's face lit up like Christmas morning. Son, I thought you never asked. They waded into the puddle together, rain still falling around them. The water was cold and dirty, nothing like the pristine baptismal pools of Ethan's childhood church. But as Ray placed one hand on his back and another on his chest, something sacred settled over them. Ethan Cole, I baptize you in the name of the Father who created you, the Son who died for you, and the Holy Spirit who's about to do a new thing in you. Ray lowered him backward into the muddy water. For a moment, Ethan was completely submerged, the sounds of the world muffled and distant. Then Ray lifted him up, water streaming from his hair, his clothes, his skin. When Ethan stood up, gasping and shivering, something was different. The craving was still there, but it felt smaller somehow, manageable, like a voice that had been screaming was now just whispering. How do you feel? Ray asked, both of them standing in the muddy puddle as rain continued to fall. Ethan looked down at his reflection in the murky water, then up at Ray's expectant face. Like I'm not alone anymore. Ray smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to the family, son. As they walked back toward the camp, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year. Not happiness exactly, and certainly not the artificial warmth of heroin. This was different, quieter but stronger, like a foundation being laid deep underground where no one could see it but everyone could feel it. For the first time since his knee hit the turf at Riverside High, Ethan Cole felt like he might have a future. Being baptized didn't magically erase the addiction. Ethan learned that the hard way over the next several months. The cravings still came in waves, sometimes gentle nudges he could ignore, sometimes tsunamis that knocked him to his knees. But something fundamental had shifted. Where before he fought alone, now he had an army. Cravings hitting, he'd tell Ray during the worst moments, "All right, let's walk." They'd pace the camp together, Ray talking about anything. His time in Vietnam, his favorite Bible verses, his theory about why the Chicago Bears couldn't win a championship. It didn't matter what he said. What mattered was that he was there, solid and present, when Ethan felt like he might disappear. Linda became his accountability partner. Every morning at 6, she'd shake him awake. "Recovery meeting, college boy. Time to get your mind right." Their meetings were just Linda, Ethan, Frank, and whoever else wanted to join, sitting in a circle sharing how they felt, what they were struggling with, and what they were grateful for. It was rough around the edges, no workbooks or professional facilitators, but it was real. "I'm grateful Tommy's still alive," Ms. S said one morning, her belly now 8 months round. "And I'm grateful this baby's gonna be born clean, even if she's born under a bridge. I'm grateful for that dumpster behind the bakery. They old bread tastes like birthday cake when you're hungry enough." When it was Ethan's turn, he surprised himself. "I'm grateful for that puddle baptism, and I'm grateful y'all didn't give up on me when I wanted to give up on myself." The work was relentless, but meaningful. Ray organized food distribution every Tuesday and Thursday, coordinating with local churches and food banks. Ethan helped carry boxes, set up tables, and learned everyone's name and story. There was Mrs. Henderson, 73, who'd lived in her car since her landlord sold her apartment building. She always asked for extra dog food for Buster, a 3-legged terrier who never left her side. There was Miguel, a day laborer who spoke limited English but always helped other people first before taking food for himself. There was Sarah, barely 18, who'd aged out of foster care and was trying to finish high school while sleeping in doorways. Each person who came through their line was fighting their own war against circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. But they kept fighting. They kept showing up. They kept caring for each other in ways that made Ethan's suburban upbringing look shallow by comparison. "You're good at this," Ray told him one evening as they cleaned up after food distribution. "At what?" "At seeing people, really seeing them. Most folks look at homeless people like they are problems to be solved or dangers to be avoided. You look at them like they are people with stories worth knowing." Ethan folded a card table, thinking about what Ray had said. "I used to be one of those people, before all this. I probably walked past homeless people 100 times without really seeing them. And now? Now I know any of us is about 3 bad breaks away from being here. Tommy aged out of foster care. Ms. ran from an abusive boyfriend. Frank lost his job. I got hurt and found pills. None of us planned to end up under a bridge, but here we are." Ray nodded approvingly. "That's compassion, son, real compassion. Knowing that the line between us and them is a lot thinner than most people want to believe." The hardest part wasn't the physical conditions or even the constant fight against addiction. The hardest part was watching people he'd grown to love struggle with demons they couldn't always defeat. 3 months after his baptism, Ethan found Linda passed out behind the camp with a needle in her arm. "Damn it, Linda," he said, checking her pulse and breathing. She was alive, but barely conscious. When she came around an hour later, she was devastated. "I had 67 days, she cried. 67 days clean, and I threw it away for 10 minutes of feeling normal." "So you start over," Ethan said, holding her while she sobbed. "Day 1 starts right now." "How can you not hate me?" Ethan thought about that question. 6 months ago, he might have been disgusted, might have written Linda off as a lost cause. Now all he felt was sadness for her pain and determination to help her fight. Because somebody didn't hate me when I was where you are. Ray kept believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Now it's my turn to believe in you. The next morning, Linda was at their 6 a.m. meeting, starting her count over at day 1. But she was there, and that was what mattered. As winter began to thaw into spring, Ethan realized he'd stopped thinking about his old life. He didn't miss the pressure of being perfect, the expectations, the constant performance. He missed his parents, missed the comfort and security, but he didn't miss the person he'd been trying to be. Under the bridge, he'd found something he'd never had in his suburban life, a purpose bigger than himself.
Two years after his baptism in that muddy puddle, Ethan Cole stood before a gathering of 47 people under the same overpass where he'd first met Ray. But this time, he wasn't the one seeking help. He was the one offering it. "Good morning, family," he called out, his voice carrying the authority that comes not from education or position, but from having walked the same broken road as everyone listening. "Good morning, Pastor Ethan," they responded in unison, a tradition that had developed naturally over the months. Ray sat in the front row, his face beaming with pride. At 68, the old preacher had officially passed the torch to his protege, though he never missed a service. "Today, I want to talk about something I learned the hard way," Ethan continued, looking out over faces that reflected every kind of struggle imaginable. "I want to talk about the difference between being rescued and being redeemed." Miss sat in the third row, holding her daughter Sophie, now 18 months old and healthy despite her rough start in life. Tommy was next to her, clean for over a year and working part-time at a construction site Frank had connected him with. Linda was there too, holding her 6-month sobriety chip, a bottle cap Ray had painted gold and inscribed with her name and the date. She'd relapsed twice more since that first time, but she kept coming back, kept fighting, kept believing. "When I first got here," Ethan said, pacing in front of his congregation, "I thought rescue meant someone coming to take me away from this place. I thought redemption was about getting my old life back, the scholarship, the suburban house, the approval of people who'd written me off." Heads nodded throughout the crowd. Everyone understood the fantasy of returning to a life that addiction had stolen. But here's what I learned under this bridge, in this community, from all of you. Redemption isn't about going back. It's about going forward. It's about taking the worst things that happened to you and letting God use them to help somebody else. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand. At 75, she'd become the unofficial grandmother of the community, still living in her car, but now helping with childcare and cooking. "Pastor, how do you know the difference between God's voice and your own wishful thinking?" Ethan smiled. Mrs. Henderson's questions were always the hardest ones, the ones that cut straight to the heart of things. "That's a great question, Mrs. H. For me, God's voice sounds a lot like Ray's voice that first night when he told me I wasn't alone. It sounds like Linda waking me up every morning for meetings, even when she didn't want to get up herself. It sounds like Tommy asking if I needed anything when he barely had anything to give." He paused, looking around at faces that had become family. "God's voice sounds like love showing up in places where it's not supposed to exist. And if you listen close enough, you can hear it everywhere under this bridge." After the service, people lingered as they always did. Frank was teaching Miguel basic English phrases. Sarah, now 19 and working at a coffee shop, was helping Tommy fill out applications for trade school. Ray pulled Ethan aside as they cleaned up the folding chairs they'd acquired from a closing church. "You know what today is?" Ray asked. "Sunday?" 2 years since your baptism. 2 years since you died in that puddle and came up somebody new. Ethan looked around the camp that had become his ministry, his mission field, his home. It wasn't much to look at, a collection of tarps and cardboard, shopping carts and sleeping bags, all huddled under a concrete ceiling. But it was alive with something most suburban churches would kill for: authentic community built on shared struggle and mutual care. "I got a call yesterday," Ethan said quietly, "from my mother." Ray raised his eyebrows. Ethan's parents had reached out sporadically over the past 2 years, cautious phone calls, careful letters, always with an underlying invitation to come home and get back on track. "What'd she say?" Ethan smiled. "She said she didn't recognize the person in the article, but she was proud of him anyway." "You thinking about going to see them?" "Maybe. Someday, when I'm ready." Ethan folded the last chair and stacked them with the others. "But this is home now, Ray. These people are my family. This is where I belong." Ray clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the best kind of calling, son. The kind you can't walk away from even if you wanted to." As the sun set behind the city skyline, casting long shadows under the overpass, Ethan made his evening rounds. He checked on Miss and Sophie, brought Mrs. Henderson her diabetes medication, and sat with a new arrival, a middle-aged woman named Janet, who'd lost her apartment when her disability checks stopped coming in. "I don't know how I ended up here," Janet said, crying into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Nobody does," Ethan replied, sitting beside her on a concrete ledge. "But you're here now, and that means you're family, and family takes care of each other." Later that night, as the camp settled into quiet, Ethan walked to the spot where Ray had baptized him 2 years before. The puddle was there again after an afternoon rain, reflecting the city lights like a broken mirror. He knelt beside it, not to pray exactly, but to remember, to mark the distance between the boy who'd been thrown out of his parents' house and the man who now shepherded a flock most people pretended didn't exist. The water rippled in the wind, distorting his reflection until he could barely recognize himself, but that was okay. The person he used to be was supposed to be unrecognizable. That was the whole point of dying and being reborn. Tomorrow, there would be new people to care for, new crises to manage, new opportunities to show love in places where it's not expected. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of his congregation again and preach about hope in a place most people associated with hopelessness. But tonight, he was simply Ethan Cole, former Harvard-bound student, former addict, current street pastor, kneeling beside a puddle under a bridge, grateful beyond words for the grace that had found him in the last place anyone would think to look. The conference center was a world away from the overpass. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings. Polished marble floors reflected the light of 100 table lamps. 500 people in business suits and designer dresses sat at round tables covered in white linen, sipping coffee from bone china cups. Ethan Cole stood backstage in the only suit he owned, a thrift store special that Ray had helped him pick out for the occasion. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie for the 10th time. "You ready for this, Pastor?" asked Dr. Sarah Martinez, the conference coordinator who'd invited him to speak at the National Recovery and Redemption Summit. Ethan looked through the curtain at the audience. Addiction counselors, social workers, politicians, and recovery advocates from across the country. People who made their living helping people like the ones under his bridge. People who would go home tonight to comfortable beds and full refrigerators. "Honestly, I'm terrified." Dr. Martinez smiled. "Good. That means it matters to you." The introduction was longer than Ethan had expected. Dr. Martinez talked about his innovative street ministry, his unconventional approach to addiction recovery, and his remarkable personal transformation. She made him sound like a social experiment rather than a person who'd simply learned to love his neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ethan Cole, founder and pastor of the Bridge community. The applause was polite, professional. Ethan walked to the podium, looking out at faces that were friendly but distant, interested but safe. He'd prepared remarks, talking points about community-based recovery and the importance of meeting people where they are, professional language for professional people. Instead, he told them about Tommy. 2 years ago, I watched a 19-year-old kid nearly die from a heroin overdose under a bridge in downtown Chicago. While we waited for paramedics, an old Vietnam veteran named Ray held Tommy's hand and prayed over his body. That veteran had no medical training, no certification, no official authority to do anything except love a dying kid. The room grew quiet. Coffee cups stopped clinking against saucers. Tommy survived that night. He's been clean for over a year now. He's learning construction work from a man named Frank, who lost everything in the economic crash, but never lost his ability to teach someone a trade. Tommy's getting baptized next month in the same puddle where I was baptized 3 years ago. Ethan paused, looking out at faces that were no longer distant. I'm not here to tell you that church under a bridge is the answer to addiction. I'm here to tell you that love is the answer to addiction. Real love, messy love, love that shows up when someone relapses for the 4th time. Love that shares a can of cold soup when it's all you have. Love that believes in redemption, even when redemption seems impossible. He told them about Linda, who'd relapsed multiple times but kept coming back to their morning meetings. About Niece, who'd given birth to a healthy daughter despite being homeless and in early recovery. About Mrs. Henderson, who turned a car into a home and her homelessness into a ministry to other elderly people on the streets. These aren't success stories in the way you might measure success. Most of the people I pastor are still homeless. Some are still struggling with addiction. None of them have been featured on magazine covers or invited to speak at conferences. The room was completely silent now. But they're alive. They're fighting. They're caring for each other in ways that would put most of our suburban communities to shame. And they've taught me something I never learned in 18 years of suburban privilege. That grace isn't something you earn or something you deserve. Grace is something that finds you in the last place anyone thinks to look. Ethan's voice grew stronger as he continued. 3 years ago, I was a Harvard-bound student with a 4.0 GPA and a scholarship to study law. I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought I knew what a meaningful life was supposed to be. Then a football injury introduced me to pain medication, which introduced me to heroin, which introduced me to the streets. He gestured toward the elegant conference room. By the standards of this room, my life went completely off the rails. I lost everything that's supposed to matter. But under that bridge, I found something I'd never had. A community that loved me, not for what I could achieve, but simply because I existed. I found a calling that didn't depend on my performance or my potential. I found God in a muddy puddle. The applause started slowly, then built to something that felt less like professional courtesy and more like recognition. During the question period, a woman in an expensive suit raised her hand. Pastor Cole, what would you say to parents whose children are struggling with addiction? What hope can you offer them?
Ethan thought about his own parents, about the phone calls that had grown warmer over the past year, about the careful rebuilding of trust that might never be complete, but was real nonetheless. I'd tell them that their child isn't gone. Their child is lost, but lost isn't the same as gone. And I'd tell them that sometimes the very thing that looks like destruction is actually the thing that leads to salvation. My parents' worst nightmare, watching their son become a homeless drug addict, turned out to be the beginning of something beautiful they never could have imagined. After the conference, people lingered to talk. Business cards were exchanged, invitations to speak at other events were extended. Dr. Martinez talked about possible funding for his ministry, about expansion opportunities, about taking his model to other cities. But Ethan's mind was already back under the bridge, wondering how Sunday service had gone in his absence, whether the new arrival from Friday was settling in okay, whether Ray needed help with the Tuesday food distribution. The flight back to Chicago gave him time to think. Looking down at the city lights from 30,000 feet, he could almost see the overpass where his real life had begun, where a community of throwaway people had taught him what it meant to be human. He thought about the teenagers in the audience who might be hiding pill bottles in their backpacks, the executives who might be fighting their own private battles with substances or despair, the parents who might be lying awake at night wondering if they'd failed their children. All of them were closer to that bridge than they knew. All of them were one tragedy, one mistake, one bad break away from needing the kind of grace that only comes from people who have nothing left to lose except each other. The plane descended through the clouds and the city spread out below him like a galaxy of individual stories. Somewhere down there, under a concrete bridge, Ray was probably leading evening prayers. Linda was probably helping with dinner preparation. Tommy was probably reading to Mrs. Henderson's dog. Somewhere down there, home was waiting. As the wheels touched down at O'Hare, Ethan Cole smiled and said a quiet prayer of gratitude for the injury that had ended his old life and the puddle that had begun his new one. He was a street pastor now, and he had work to do.
Six months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with the usual mail Ray collected from a P.O. box donated by a local church supporter. The return address was familiar, 1247 Maple Street, Riverside Heights. Home. "It's from your folks," Ray said, handing Ethan the envelope as they prepared for the evening food distribution. Ethan had been corresponding with his parents more regularly over the past year. Careful letters at first, then phone calls, and even a brief visit when his father was in Chicago on business. But this felt different, heavier somehow. Inside was a handwritten note from his mother and something else, a newspaper clipping from the Riverside Heights Gazette. "Dear Ethan," the letter began in his mother's careful script, "your father and I saw this article about a young man who started a program to help teenagers struggling with addiction. It reminded us of someone we know. We're proud of you, son. More proud than we've ever been. Love, Mom and Dad." The newspaper clipping was about Jake Mendoza, the same Jake who had introduced Ethan to heroin in the school parking lot 3 years ago. But this Jake was clean, working as a peer counselor, and had started a program called Second Chances for At-Risk Youth. At the bottom of the article, there was a quote that made Ethan's breath catch. "I learned about real redemption from watching someone I thought I'd destroyed turn his life around completely. Ethan Cole showed me that it's never too late to choose a different story." That evening, after the food distribution was finished and the camp had settled into its nightly rhythm, Ethan sat by the puddle where Ray had baptized him. The water reflected the city lights, just as it had that night 3 years ago when everything changed. Ray joined him as Ethan had known he would. "Funny how things come full circle,"
the old preacher said, settling onto a milk crate beside him. Jake's helping kids now. Kids like Tommy was. Kids like I was. Ripples, Ray said simply. You throw a stone in still water and the ripples keep going long after the stone disappears. Your stories creating ripples you'll never even know about. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the camp wind down for the night. Miss was reading Sophie a bedtime story in their improved shelter, a small RV that had been donated after Ethan's conference speech. Tawny was helping Frank teach basic carpentry skills to 2 new arrivals. Linda was leading a women's support group around a small fire. I got another invitation to speak. Phoenix this time. Conference on faith-based recovery. You going? I'm thinking about it, but only if you come with me. Ray chuckled. Old warhorse like me at a fancy conference? I'd probably spill coffee on some important person. You're the one who taught me everything I know about this work, about love showing up in impossible places, about grace that finds you in puddles. I just pointed you toward the water, son. You did the drowning and the rising all on your own. As if on cue, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She was maybe 22, well-dressed but obviously desperate. Her hands shook as she spoke. Excuse me, I heard someone told me there was a preacher here who helps people with problems. Ethan and Ray exchanged a look. They'd seen this approach hundreds of times. Someone new, someone lost, someone who'd heard about the community under the bridge through the mysterious network that connected people in need. What's your name? Ethan asked gently. Jessica. I think I need help. Well, Jessica, Ray said, standing and extending his hand. Well, you came to the right place. We specialize in help around here. As Ray began talking with Jessica, explaining how the community worked and what kind of support was available, Ethan felt the familiar stirring of purpose that had driven him for 3 years now. Another story beginning, another person choosing to trust strangers with their brokenness, another opportunity for grace to show up where it wasn't expected. He looked around the camp one more time, at the faces, the makeshift shelters, the small fires that provided warmth and light against the darkness. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. Most people driving overhead probably saw it as a problem to be solved, an eyesore to be cleaned up. But Ethan saw it for what it really was, a sanctuary, a place where the last became first, where the lost found family, where death and resurrection happened in muddy puddles under concrete skies. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tommy. Pastor, I got my acceptance letter from trade school today. 6 months and I'll be a certified electrician. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Ethan smiled and typed back, That's what family does. Proud of you, brother. Another ripple. Another life changed, which would change other lives, which would change still others in ways they might never fully understand. The city hummed around them, millions of people in apartments and houses, most of them just trying to make it through another day. And here, under a bridge, a small community continued the ancient work of loving each other through whatever came next. Ethan Cole, former Harvard prospect, former addict, current street pastor, closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the long, strange journey that had brought him home to a place he could never have imagined. When he opened his eyes, Ray was baptizing Jessica in the puddle, just as he had baptized Ethan 3 years ago, just as he would baptize whoever came next and whoever came after that. The work continued. The grace continued. The ripples spread outward into the darkness, carrying light to places that needed it most. And under the bridge, the church bells rang.